me ask you, what does a winemaker bring to the bottle?
Well, I think the winemaker is essentially just, I think more than anything else, it's just stewardship of what's grown. I think most of the heavy lifting is done in the vineyard. I mean, I think, timely pruning, thinning especially, things like that. I mean, what we do basically is just, steward the wine through fermentation, which is easily the most important thing we do. And then beyond that, I mean, if you've done a good job in the vineyard and you've been attentive during fermentation, beyond that, a lot of it is simply letting the wine develop in the barrel.
And what's it like, like working with your dad? It's like your dad, and his brother, kind of started something here.
Yes.
And what's that like for you coming into, like you've worked at other wineries now, and then you're coming here. Like what's that like for you?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's nice taking the guesswork out of some of it. Because certainly, I think I bring a more analytical approach than my dad does, so I like doing a lot of experiments. And a lot of times,
experiments in terms of?
Oh, in terms of how we thin, when we thin, how we trellis, more lees contact, less lees contact, how hard we squeeze the press, just a lot of things. Adding heat at different times during the fermentation, cold soaking for extended periods of time, extended maceration. But he's tried a lot of this.
Yeah.
And so when I mention it, I mean, a lot of times I'll get something back like, well, we tried that back in '95 and it didn't really work that well. And here's why it didn't work, and here's why I think it was a bad idea.
Yeah.
And here's why it might work, but not, maybe not this year, maybe a cooler year, maybe something like that.
Yeah. And how is that relationship, work for you? It's like sometimes, that can be difficult, and other times.
William, you've talked to my father for a while. He's a very easy person to get along with. I mean, even being his son, it's he'll let me make mistakes if I'm really pushing the point. He's quite happy to let it. He's quite happy to let it. Like, okay, if you think you can do it, go ahead and give it a shot.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, it'll work out exactly as he said it would, and fall flat on its face. And he's like, well, then, and there you go.
And there's no "I told you so."
Oh no.
Cool.
Yeah.
What do you think, when you look down, it's like you have like a family kind of a perspective here.
Mm-hmm.
When you look, say, 10, 15 years out, it's like, what's the Oregon wine industry going to look like?
Well, I think certainly at the north end of the valley, I think it's where we're going to really see the big facelift, because that's where it's the most densely concentrated. I mean,
facelift in terms of?
Well, you can see Dundee's changing, Newburgh's changing, McMinnville even and Spurts now is beginning to change. There's more money coming in. The industry is now, I think, pushing to a point where it will soon, those towns will be centered around servicing the wine industry and nothing besides.
Uh-huh.
I think it's going to be a little slower coming this way, but
to the old hills here.
Yeah.
Because you're a little bit more on the periphery, or?
Yeah. The North Valley is closer to Portland, and hence I think was planted first just because of proximity. We're a little further out on the fringe, but you can even see it now. I think the big cowpers planting down here is one of many to come. I know they just planted a huge vineyard. It was actually big one down south, King Estate.
Uh-huh.
Just planted.
Cowpers did?
No. King Estate just planted something like 1,000 more acres. This huge vineyard that sits down below us isn't even the biggest one they have. There's a 400-acre vineyard just outside of Yamhill, Carlton.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of this, it's what you're beginning to see is more. What people worried about was more of the monoculture. Grapevines covering all the hillsides and nothing else.
Yeah. One thing I'm kind of curious about is you worked at Rex Hill.
I did.
And you're pulling fruit from a different area. Let's see.
Rex Hill sourced grapes from all over the place, but yeah, their big estate vineyard was there was estate grapes, and then Jacob Hart sat just in the foothills of Dundee.
How is that the wine that you're making there? How's it different than the wine that you make from the fruit here?
Well, the approach was different to a certain extent. I think it's interesting. I think we tend to get more. I think we're helped out and hurt a bit by. It's just our site simply is a lower pH site.
Uh-huh.
what I saw a lot with Red Hills fruit was, especially in really warm years, it's difficult to keep the acidity kind of in check. I mean, because you're developing these beautiful ripe flavors, but at the same time your pH is kind of rolling right off the table. So I think in that sense, I think our wines tend to be a bit more austere. I think they tend to be a bit more ageable here, but I think they lack some of that opulence you see from Red Hills fruit.
Opulence.
That big black red fruit, or red and black fruit. I mean, it's a softer in terms of acid wine. So I think
Softer
it does
here or there?
there.
Uh-huh.
So I think it does kind of lend itself to that big, opulent, fleshy style. Whereas I think the wines that I taste from the Eola Hills tend to be much more focused and also a bit more
focused.
Well, I'm essentially trying to find nice ways to say a bit more taut, a bit more acidic.
Okay.
There is that firm vein of acidity that doesn't necessarily lend itself for 5 years to big lush flavors. It tends to be more on the red fruit, very focused, intense fruit, but not certainly not a big velvety wine on the palate.
Uh-huh.
I think that comes with time, but I think it does take time to get there.
What, 5 years?
At least, yeah.
Uh-huh. And what makes the difference between the Dundee Hills and here?
Well, I think proximity to the Van Duzer corridor is probably the biggest part. The big, huge hole in the Coast Range sits close to us, and at night, this cold air funnels in and pushes the warm air up, so we tend to cool off pretty quick in the evenings. And cool evenings usually lends to holding your acidity a bit better.
What about soil types?
Well, we're on the shallow version of what they have in the Red Hills. It's Nikaya, which is the shallow series of Jory.
Yeah.
It's a bit rockier, but Jacob Hart is a huge mishmash of I think 18 different soil types. So I think the soil types are pretty equatable. Just a matter of how high up you go to where you find the deeper red soil, the Jory.
Yeah. All right, Ben. Thank you very much. I really
You're welcome.
appreciate your time.
No, that's fine.
Appreciate it.
You've caught us at a not so busy day.
I appreciate that too. Well, you've got some big weekends.